Imagine a border where silence finally replaces the sound of conflict. A place where, after decades of mistrust, two nations pause, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Today, we are not talking about politics, not about blame, but about understanding God. Why did Afghanistan and Pakistan, two neighbors with a long and difficult past, suddenly choose peace? Was it strategy or surrender? Bro. The answer is deeper than headlines. It's a story of survival, of transformation, and of realizing that power in today's world doesn't come from dominance. It comes from direction. Both nations stand at a crossroads. One path leads to the same mistakes of history. The other leads to a future built on logic, not ego. And that's why this conversation matters. Not only for South Asia, but for the entire world watching. Because what we'll uncover today is not just a ceasefire, it's a mindset shift. It's how nations learn that peace can be the most powerful weapon of all. So stay with me till the very end, because what you're about to hear isn't just the story of two countries. It's the real story of how strategy can redefine destiny. Baruhri. The relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan has always been a complex interplay of history, geography, and competing interests. The roots of tension trace back to the early years following the creation of Pakistan in 1947, when Afghanistan became the only country to oppose Pakistan's admission to the United Nations, primarily over the issue of the Durand Line, a colonial-era boundary drawn by the British in 1893 that split ethnic Pashtun territories between the two nations. This border dispute became more than a matter of geography. It evolved into a symbol of mistrust and unresolved identity politics. Over time, both nations began viewing each other through a lens shaped by security concerns, ideological differences, and regional influence. During the Cold War, Afghanistan and Pakistan were placed on opposite sides of the geopolitical divide. Pakistan aligned with the Western Bloc and became a key ally of the United States, while Afghanistan leaned toward the Soviet Union. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 changed everything. Pakistan, with Western backing, became the staging ground for Afghan resistance movements, giving rise to militant networks that would later outlive the war itself. When the Soviets withdrew and Afghanistan descended into civil war, Pakistan saw an opportunity to back groups that aligned with its interests, hoping to secure a friendly government in Kabul. However, this policy created long-term consequences, including cross-border militancy, mistrust, and recurring security crises. The events of 9/11 and the subsequent U.S.-led intervention further complicated the landscape. Both nations found themselves under immense international scrutiny. Pakistan as a frontline ally in the war on terror, and Afghanistan as the battleground of global counterterrorism. The mutual accusations of harboring, militants, and interfering in each other's affairs continued to erode trust. Yet beneath these layers of conflict lies an undeniable interdependence. Geography binds the two nations together, economically, socially, and strategically. Millions of Afghan refugees have lived in Pakistan for decades, and trade routes connecting Central Asia to South Asia naturally pass through both territories. Understanding this historical context helps explain why tensions persist despite shared cultural and religious ties. The mistrust between Kabul and Islamabad is not simply about recent clashes or border incidents. It's rooted in decades of political maneuvering, foreign interventions, and competing national narratives. To move forward, both countries must acknowledge this shared history, not as a weapon, but as a lesson in how deeply intertwined their futures truly are. The recent ceasefire between Afghanistan and Pakistan did not emerge overnight. It is the result of a gradual shift in regional priorities, domestic realities, and external pressures. To understand why both sides chose this moment to pause hostilities, one must look at the broader context surrounding their decisions. For years, intermittent border skirmishes, cross-border attacks, and diplomatic tensions created a cycle of blame and retaliation. However, by 2025, both nations were facing an environment where prolonged conflict no longer served their strategic or economic interests. The idea of a ceasefire, once seen as a sign of weakness, has now become a calculated move aimed at redefining regional stability. From Pakistan's perspective, the timing reflects internal and external recalibrations. Domestically, Pakistan has been under immense pressure to focus on economic recovery, counter inflation, and stabilize its political environment. Border instability with Afghanistan drains resources, diverts military focus, and hampers trade routes that are crucial for Pakistan's economic future, especially under projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, and the emerging Central Asian trade networks. Externally, Islamabad understands that projecting an image of restraint and cooperation aligns with its evolving foreign policy narrative, one that emphasizes regional peace for economic growth. Moreover, growing engagement with China, Russia, and Middle Eastern states has encouraged Pakistan to appear as a bridge builder rather than a regional agitator. For Afghanistan, the ceasefire is equally strategic. After years of isolation, economic hardship, and humanitarian crises, its leadership recognizes the need to create space for reconstruction and international engagement. Internal stability is fragile, and continued border tensions only deepen insecurity and economic paralysis. Accepting a ceasefire offers breathing room to strengthen governance, attract limited foreign aid, and ease internal dissent. While some within Afghanistan's power circles may perceive compromise as risk, leadership sees it as a necessary step toward long-term survival and legitimacy. External factors also influence this moment. Regional powers like China and Russia have quietly supported de-escalation, recognizing that instability in Afghanistan spills into Central Asia and disrupts trade ambitions. Western nations, including members of the European Union, have expressed cautious optimism, urging both sides to use the ceasefire as a foundation for dialogue rather than a temporary truce. In this sense, the ceasefire represents less a surrender of power and more an acknowledgement that sustainable peace requires practical strategy, not prolonged confrontation. Pakistan's decision to support or initiate a ceasefire with Afghanistan can be better understood through the lens of strategic patience rather than surrender. Over the last few years, Islamabad's foreign policy has evolved from a defensive posture to a more calculated, multidimensional approach focused on diplomacy, regional trade, and image rebuilding. Pakistan has learned that its economic and security challenges are deeply interconnected. Instability on one border inevitably affects progress on another. In this context, maintaining peace along the western frontier is not merely a gesture of goodwill, it is a prerequisite for Pakistan's broader national strategy. The country faces the dual task of reviving its economy while countering perceptions that link it to regional instability. A ceasefire, therefore, becomes a political and economic necessity, a way to redirect national energy toward growth instead of prolonged confrontation. Pakistan's leadership understands that the global order is shifting. The new competition is not about territory, but about influence through trade, connectivity, and innovation. Projects like the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and its potential extension into Central Asia demand stability, especially along transit routes connecting Pakistan to Afghanistan. Continuous skirmishes or diplomatic breakdowns directly threaten these ambitions. By opting for restraint, Pakistan is signaling to investors and regional partners that it can act responsibly and prioritize development over aggression. Furthermore, within Pakistan, there is increasing recognition that a peaceful Afghanistan contributes to domestic security. Cross-border militancy, refugee influxes, and illicit trade have historically placed immense strain on Pakistan's economy and social fabric. Stability across the border translates into less military expenditure and more resources for economic reform and human development. At the same time, this shift also serves Pakistan's diplomatic goals. By embracing the language of peace, it positions itself as a regional stabilizer at a time when international trust remains fragile. In forums from the United Nations to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Pakistan can now advocate for dialogue and economic partnership instead of reacting to allegations of interference. It also aligns with Islamabad's attempt to diversify its foreign partnerships, strengthening ties not just with Beijing, but also with Moscow, Ankara, and Gulf capitals. This approach of strategic patience allows Pakistan to avoid direct confrontation, maintain leverage, and gradually reshape its global narrative. Rather than withdrawing from influence, Pakistan is recalibrating its strategy, shifting from military dominance to economic diplomacy and long-term regional integration. Afghanistan's decision to support the ceasefire reflects a growing sense of realism, shaped by internal challenges and shifting regional dynamics. After decades of war, political transition, and humanitarian crises, the leadership in Kabul recognizes that continued confrontation with Pakistan brings diminishing returns. The focus has gradually shifted from ideological resistance to pragmatic survival. For Afghanistan, maintaining internal stability, rebuilding infrastructure, and re-engaging with the international community have become far greater priorities than asserting dominance through prolonged tension. A temporary peace, therefore, is not viewed as submission, but as a strategic pause, an opportunity to consolidate internal strength and reposition itself in a region undergoing economic and political transformation. Afghanistan's internal realities are pressing. The country continues to face economic hardship, with limited access to foreign reserves, slow reconstruction, and widespread unemployment. Sanctions, drought, and isolation from global financial systems have made governance increasingly difficult. In such an environment, border instability and conflict with Pakistan not only divert scarce resources, but also weaken the government's control over rural areas. The ceasefire allows Afghanistan to redirect attention to essential governance, rebuilding education, healthcare, and trade infrastructure, while reducing pressure on security forces stretched thin across multiple fronts. It also offers an opening for dialogue with neighboring states, which can help ease economic blockades and create new trade pathways, especially towards Central and South Asia. From a diplomatic standpoint, the ceasefire helps Kabul demonstrate political maturity to the international community. European and regional observers have long viewed Afghanistan's leadership through a lens of unpredictability. By choosing peace over provocation, Afghanistan projects an image of rational governance and readiness for constructive engagement. This is vital at a time when the country seeks recognition, humanitarian aid, and investment. It also gives Afghanistan leverage in future negotiations, showing that it can act responsibly when its sovereignty and stability are respected. At a deeper level, this decision reflects a strategic understanding that peace can serve as power. While Afghanistan's leadership may continue to maintain its ideological independence, it also recognizes that long-term survival depends on cooperation rather than confrontation. Peace brings access to trade, technology, and foreign partnerships that war could never provide. By accepting a ceasefire now, Afghanistan is not abandoning its principles, but adapting them to a reality where diplomacy and economic resilience are the new foundations of national strength. The international response to the Afghanistan-Pakistan ceasefire has been cautious yet notably hopeful. For many observers in Europe, Asia, and the wider global community, this development marks a rare moment when two neighboring countries with decades of mistrust are attempting to choose dialogue over confrontation. The United Nations and several regional organizations have welcomed the ceasefire as a positive signal, emphasizing that even a temporary reduction in violence can open doors for longer-term cooperation. However, The global response remains mixed, balancing optimism with a degree of skepticism rooted in history. Both countries have previously announced peace initiatives that eventually collapsed due to political differences, militant activity, or shifting regional alliances. This memory shapes how the international community now interprets the move as a hopeful step, but not yet a guarantee of peace. In Europe, policymakers view the ceasefire through the broader lens of regional stability and humanitarian impact. A peaceful Afghanistan and Pakistan could significantly reduce the drivers of migration, extremism, and economic instability that indirectly affect Europe. The European Union, while refraining from taking sides, has quietly encouraged both nations to use this moment to build sustainable diplomatic frameworks, potentially supported by neutral mediators or regional mechanisms. The EU's interest is primarily humanitarian and developmental, focusing on creating the conditions where trade, education, and aid programs can operate safely across borders. European governments also understand that lasting peace in South Asia strengthens global security, reduces the risk of radicalization, and encourages economic connectivity between Asia and Europe through new trade routes. Meanwhile, regional powers have reacted based on their own strategic interests. China and Russia have praised the ceasefire as a stabilizing measure, aligning with their broader goal of maintaining secure transport and energy corridors through Central Asia. Middle Eastern nations, particularly Qatar and Saudi Arabia, have shown interest in supporting post-ceasefire dialogue through quiet diplomacy, viewing stability in Afghanistan as vital for broader Islamic world unity. The United States, while less vocal, remains watchful, assessing how this truce might affect counterterrorism cooperation and regional power balance. Overall, the international response reflects a deep desire for sustainable peace, but also a recognition of the fragility of trust. The world has seen many ceasefires fade into renewed siege conflict. This time, however, there is a collective understanding that peace between Afghanistan and Pakistan could reshape South Asia's destiny and serve as a model for pragmatic diplomacy in an increasingly divided world. The recent ceasefire between Afghanistan and Pakistan reflects a broader realization that true strength in the 21st century lies not in military dominance, but in sustainable peace. Both nations appear to be learning that constant confrontation drains resources, isolates them diplomatically, and prevents them from harnessing their full economic and human potential. The logic behind their current approach suggests a shift from short-term tactical decisions to long-term strategic thinking, one where peace itself becomes a form of power. Rather than viewing the ceasefire as a sign of surrender, both sides seem to recognize it as a calculated step towards securing internal stability, regional credibility, and economic opportunity. This perspective aligns with a global trend where nations increasingly value cooperation, connectivity, and economic diplomacy over endless cycles of hostility. For Pakistan, peace provides an opportunity to strengthen its image as a responsible regional player. It allows the country to redirect military expenditure toward rebuilding its economy, investing in innovation, and developing infrastructure that connects it more deeply with Central and South Asia. Similarly, Afghanistan gains breathing space to focus on governance, humanitarian needs, and the reconstruction of a war-torn nation. The leadership in Kabul understands that legitimacy in today's world is built not only through control, but through the ability to deliver stability and opportunity to its citizens. In this sense, both sides are not stepping back from influence, they are redefining it through restraint. Regionally, this approach can set a powerful precedent. South Asia has long been trapped in a cycle of competition, suspicion, and border disputes. A durable peace between Afghanistan and Pakistan could pave the way for broader cooperation involving Central Asian republics, Iran, and even India. Economic corridors, energy pipelines, and cross-border trade routes could transform what was once a zone of conflict into a hub of connectivity. Moreover, in an era of shifting global alliances, such peace initiatives allow smaller nations to assert independence by pursuing shared prosperity rather than acting as proxies for larger powers. Ultimately, this evolving logic reveals that neither Afghanistan nor Pakistan is surrendering. Instead, both are repositioning themselves for a future defined by mutual interest rather than mutual fear. Peace, when treated as a long-term investment, becomes a strategy, one that can reshape the region's political landscape and open new possibilities for generations to come. In conclusion, the story of Afghanistan and Pakistan's ceasefire is not one of victory or defeat. It is a story of realization. Both ions, after decades of uncertainty and conflict, are beginning to understand that peace is not the absence of power, but its highest expression. What we are witnessing today is not surrender, but strategy, a recognition that diplomacy, stability, and cooperation can achieve what war and division never could. This moment carries lessons not only for South Asia, but for the entire world, that dialogue must replace suspicion, and shared progress must triumph over historic grudges. If both countries continue on this path, they could redefine their futures and contribute to a more balanced, interconnected region, one driven by trade, education, and innovation rather than confrontation. Their journey reminds us that peace is not given, it is built, nurtured, and protected through wisdom and patience. To everyone listening, policymakers, students, and global citizens, may this story inspire you to believe that even the most complicated histories can give birth to new beginnings when courage meets reason. The road ahead will not be easy, but it will be worth walking together. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to understanding the deeper logic of peace. May wisdom guide decisions, may compassion shape diplomacy, and may peace prevail where conflict once stood. Good luck, and thank you.